Hello there, this is Senris. In this video, we will be discussing the anti-imperialist politics of Donkey Kong Country. First, I'll talk about what exactly imperialism is and how it's implemented, and then I'll go over how it can be resisted and ultimately defeated. Like most words, imperialism has several definitions. In the colloquial sense, imperialism is usually thought of as when one country invades another and takes control of it for the sake of the invader. Most people associate imperialism with colonialism, especially with regards to the Roman or British empires. This definition is fine for everyday use, but it's not the one Donkey Kong would use. Donkey Kong is a Marxist-Leninist, and as such, he uses the word to mean the specific process of imperialism and how it relates to capitalism as a whole, as described in Lenin's Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the book, but I'll go over the basics for the uninitiated so they can see where Lenin and Donkey Kong are coming from. Over 100 years ago, in Lenin's time, capitalism existed in a different form than what we know today. This was a time of explosive industrial growth fueled by the Industrial Revolution, which led to massive and powerful companies in the steel, railroad, oil, etc. industries. Since capital naturally concentrates over time into fewer and fewer hands under capitalism, monopolies become inevitable. While we are very familiar with corporate mergers and monopolies in many industries today, this was a relatively new phenomenon at the start of the 20th century. Lenin referred to this form of capitalism as monopoly capitalism. Through the regular economic crises of capitalism, industrialists were able to consolidate their failed competitors' businesses and amass even more capital. Eventually, these industrialists would form ruthless business cartels which would have the power and control over their industries to cut off raw materials and labor to their competitors, as well as control prices and trade agreements. This sort of monopolizing behavior affected banks as well, which similarly consolidated until only a few banks in each country controlled all finance. These business cartels and banking monopolies colluded to maximize the financialization and extraction of as much capital as possible from a given country, giving rise to an even more advanced form of capitalism, which Lenin called finance capitalism. This new form of capitalism led to a world in which the cartels had little more to squeeze out of their own countries, and so they were forced to look overseas. The natural targets were, of course, underdeveloped countries. These countries had cheap natural resources, cheap labor, and high profitability, and so they were the optimal targets for the export of capital. Lenin contrasts the export of capital during this stage of capitalism with the export of goods associated with earlier forms of capitalism. These wealthy countries in which capitalism had become overripe have limited ability to find profitable trade within their own countries due to the aforementioned monopolization, and so must look outside. This in turn led to the division of the undeveloped world by the wealthy and powerful countries. This division took place in the form of colonizing the underdeveloped countries, such that the development and financing of said developments were ordered in such a way to maximize profitability for the colonizers rather than the inhabitants of the colonized countries. Eventually a point is reached when the entire world had been subjected to this system as a result of the advanced development of capitalism. This is a special stage of capitalism where monopolization of the entire global economy has rendered the free competition of earlier forms of capitalism all but obsolete. Lenin calls this special stage imperialism and summarizes it as follows. Imperialism is capitalism at that stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies and finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the globe among the international trusts has begun, in which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed. The most important takeaway from what Lenin teaches us is that imperialism is a natural and inevitable evolution of capitalism. Now that we understand Donkey Kong's views on imperialism, let's focus on what happened when the imperialists came to his doorstep. The Kremlings, led by King K. Rool, had exploited their own people to the maximum efficiency. From the longshoremen unloading the gangplank galleon to the chemical engineers working in Oil Drum Alley, every worker within the empire of Crocodile Isle was forced to be a cog in King K. Rool's capitalist machine. As the rate of profit declined, he did everything in his power to squeeze as much as he could from his people. He changed labor laws, lengthening the workday and taking away weekends. Child labor was brought back and pending retirements were cancelled. Unions were crushed through legal means or violence when needed. Scabs were hired to replace workers and the Kremling crew was brought in to oversee production. When the workers formed militias to fight for their rights, King K. Rool turned his cannons on them without hesitation. It was a cruel state of affairs and K. Rool's lust for profit knew no limits. Eventually he realized there were limits to how much wealth could be extracted domestically, and he set his sights abroad. He knew there was a great hoard of bananas on Donkey Kong Island, but he wasn't the only one who coveted it. K. Rool arranged for a meeting with several of his colleagues to divide up the as-of-yet uncolonized parts of the world. They bickered and fought with one another until a tenuous agreement was hashed out. Bowser would take Yoshi's Island and the northern area of the Mushroom Kingdom. King K. Rool would take Donkey Kong Island and the surrounding waters, and Ganondorf would take Hyrule and the Gerudo Desert. Ridley, through his superior negotiation skills, ended up with the entire planet of Zebes. With the carving up of the world among the sinister industrialists settled, K. Rool reached out to the National Bank of Crocodile Isle to receive the capital it would take to seize and industrialize Donkey Kong Island, which they gladly provided. With his financial situation squared away, K. Rool boarded the gangplank galleon with his Kremlings and set out for Donkey Kong Island. They arrived under the cover of night amidst a mighty storm. K. Rool took the storm as an auspicious sign of his impending succession over the island. He sent his Kremlings toward the banana horde, instructing them to divide it among his lieutenants, who would protect the horde while the Kremling forces infiltrated the island. The imperialist takeover of the island had begun. Donkey Kong awoke from a deep slumber where he dreamt of a massive banana horde that stretched as far as the eye could see. Feeling hungry, and remembering that he had a massive banana horde that stretched as far as the eye could see, he headed downstairs to eat some bananas. Upon entering his banana room, however, he saw that all of his bananas had been stolen. Some dastardly thieves must have come in the night and robbed him of his most prized possessions. Distraught as he was, he figured the day was young and maybe he could find the people who did this. He took off into the jungle, quickly finding a trail of bananas that must have been dropped by the crooks. He realized that an invading force of Kremlings had come to his island and put the local wildlife to work trying to stop him from reclaiming the products of his labor. Thankfully, Donkey's comrades Diddy and Rambi were more than willing to help him out. They started making their way across the jungle in search of the banana horde and whomever was responsible for taking it. Eventually, Donkey Kong arrived at the lair of one of King K. Rool's lieutenants, an oversized beaver who had been put in charge of a portion of the banana horde. Donkey Kong knew there was only one way to defeat imperialists who were attempting to export capital to your island. Jump on their head until they die. Although Donkey Kong was injured in the fight, his comrade Diddy was able to finish off their foe and recovered the stolen bananas. This resistance gave the imperialist Kremling crew pause as they were used to attacking with such overwhelming force, both military and economic, that their targets usually didn't put up much of a fight. The Kongs, however, would not yield to this foreign aggression. They pushed on up the mountain through perilous mines and long-abandoned temples and encountered and defeated more of K. Rool's lieutenants. The interior of the island was made up of thick jungles, perfect for ambushes and guerrilla tactics. The Kongs knew this island better than the invaders ever could, and used this to their advantage at every opportunity. Even though they were outnumbered more than 100 to 1, their knowledge of the terrain was invaluable to them and led them to victory after victory. Eventually they arrived at the most treacherous part of the island, its snow-capped peaks. A lesser monkey would have surely perished many times over to this hostile summit, but Donkey Kong persevered. Even when a blizzard threatened to send him to an early grave, he fought on, and he would not rest until his island was liberated. The weather slowly cleared and Donkey Kong descended the mountain to the industrial center that the Kremlings had set up on the island. They had already begun manufacturing goods using the island's resources, paying the island's residents substandard wages to make commodities in dangerous conditions for the Kremlings. Some of the guerrillas on the island had turned traitor and were serving as a counter-revolutionary force against the Kongs. These enemies of the people were treated the way they deserved and promptly had their heads jumped upon. These factories were completely cleared out of hostile forces and would be used by the Kongs to industrialize the island themselves once their borders were safe again. The last remaining Kremling forces were hiding in caves near the coast, which Donkey Kong and his comrades made short work of. The final battle with King K. Rool was the final obstacle in the way of freeing the island from the imperialist forces. K. Rool pulled out all the stops during their battle, employing cannon fire, his boomerang crown, and every other cheap trick he had in his repertoire. Donkey Kong narrowly clinched victory, and K. Rool and his few surviving Kremlings were forced to retreat. The invading imperialists had all been kicked off the island, and the Kongs would remain in control of their lands and resources, free from exploitation. The threat of imperialism had taught the Kongs valuable lessons, such as the inevitability of capitalist empires to covet their neighbors' resources and labor power, and they would stay wary of the imperialist powers of the world. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on Twitter for updates and on Twitch, where I plan to start streaming the games I play to make these videos. Peace.